Hello. Hi guys. Welcome to my talk, Notes, Anecdotes, and Storytelling, where I'll be talking about my background as a storyteller, what has fascinated me throughout my work with fiction, and ultimately what I think fiction can do, should do, and a little bit about how to make it do that. My name is Freja, and I'm here today out of spite. Today in the Cambridge Dictionary, spite is defined as like a feeling of anger towards someone else. This isn't really, I'm more going for something like defiance or contrarianism, but I like the sound of spite better, and I think it has more power, so we're going to go with spite. Basically, when I was asked or told that, I was happy to be a guest of honor, but I was told that that involves doing a 45-minute presentation on myself. I was like, that's ridiculous. I was like, oh, I'll just sneakily make it a presentation of all the people I've worked with through time. I know a lot of really cool people. But then I realized, and I think I tend to have a pretty good imagination, that I couldn't actually imagine any of the male creatives I know have any other reaction than, obviously I can do a 45-minute presentation, are you sure I can't have more time? So that's why I'm doing it. In general, I greatly recommend spite to anyone struggling to take up creative space. Don't do it because you think you can do a good job, because creative projects never start out being great. You have to do it either because you're too dumb to realize that you're doing a terrible job, or just because you keep doing it anyway. At the end, I have a little workshop exercise in spite if we have time for it, but in general, it's just, I see spite as a method in the arsenal of art, and something to lean back on when you find that pride, the joy, or sheer creative energy just doesn't quite cut it. I think it's needed because in many of the societies we find ourselves in now, creativity and playfulness isn't rewarded. You're supposed to be productive and make money, and if you enjoy something and it can't also make money, what the hell are you doing? So I think being playful anyway is a kind of activism, and that's why we should do it. As a self-proclaimed madwoman in the attic, meaning that the Victorians would have stashed me away somewhere to go insane, I am here today to promote playfulness, whimsy, and after looking at my career, what it turns out that I have always been aiming for, a re-enchantment of reality. I am a narrativist game maker, lab write, and independent academic with a background in comparative literature. So I've definitely not gone for what pays, but it's somehow working out anyway, which is amazing. I'm Danish, and I am especially fascinated with aesthetics of transcendence and transgression, so things that push borders, and also very interested in how to turn these things into some sort of emotional manipulation tool to connect those who experience them with something outside of their normal way of thinking. And when I say I'm a narrativist, it's because storytelling to me is the most important tool. I'm also a collector because I collect weird little stories, and I will share some with you as we go. But now I'll be taking you through some of the projects and obsessions that have shaped my aesthetic philosophy of enchantment. It boils down to an idea of the return of paganism. Well, not exactly, but also exactly. Well, this was a concept that I was smitten with at the university. It's been a big theme in 19th century literature, because just like some of us today like to romanticize the 80s, perhaps especially the ones of us who weren't actually living through them very much, people in the 1800s like to romanticize ancient Greece and Rome as a time where mankind was closer to nature and to divine inspiration and unburdened by the rules of Puritanism and modern technology and newspapers and all that. So in a sense, the return of the pagan gods, meaning a resurrection of human playfulness, connection to nature, and enjoyment of eternal mysteries, is really the only little thing that I hope to achieve as a storyteller. I don't think that's too greedy. The first ever lab I organized, and the third lab I ever attended, was Sin City Live, which was known as The Last Choice, a lab that was most definitely about democracy when we were applying for funding. And I've been, while preparing for this, I've been going through old projects and trying to analyze, like, what was the purpose? What was actually aesthetically, emotionally, the big reason for why we did this? And Sin City was about joy. We were 20 and very enthusiastic and eager to cramp as much artistic experimentation into it as we possibly could. The location, like we painted how should I be? Is this too far away? Was I too close? Is this good? This is better. Yeah, thank you. We painted the location black and white. We painted the lapos black and white. We had like colored lighting representing like the way light differs in Frank Miller's comic. We had cutting-edge sex techniques and violence techniques, and a technician controlling the light and sound, and an act structure which naturally began with the end. Like, it was obviously about like a kind of fan fiction, but it was also just about having fun with like a universe that we just loved. And I think that using a clearly defined existing universe as a genre for co-creative storytelling can be really freeing, because so you get the structure, you know the rules, you just sort of have that ability to play within it without having to stop and go like, oh, what would happen now? A lot of the time. Like, it doesn't always have to be like big and original. Sometimes it's enough that it's just fun. Which is also the same concept for like my Black Box Lab, a film noir murder mystery, which I've been making. Yeah, I made it a few years ago, and it's been running a couple times in different countries. It's basically the same thing, except this time the sex technique is a sax technique, where we play saxophone and like turn down the light. And like, if you don't know, a Black Box Lab is like, it's a lab, it's short form, it takes place in the Black Room, very theater. For this lab, every scene is set in a script format, but then it's up to the players how it plays out. And I have an example here from the scene called One Last Chance for a Dame. It takes place in the alley, it has 3 roles: the dame, the detective, and gangster number 2. A dame stands on a street corner. She's looking to leave the city. Is the detective going to ask her to stay, or will he try to help her leave? Gangster number 2 arrives mid-scene to stop the dame from leaving, regardless of their decision. So there are a few different paths the players can take, but it's going to be stereotypically film noir unless they decide to change the concept, which they can because the director is also a player. And I think tropes are great for building structures that you can play within, but it can also be great fun to subvert them, which brings us to a brief feminist intermission based on an article from the 1939, which says, "Don't be sentimental or try to get him to say something he doesn't want to by working on his emotions. Men do not like tears, especially in public places." So since we're being antagonistic and spiteful, I just want to suggest that we should all cry in public. Not necessarily right now, but like a lot more. Different games can do different things. College of Wizardry, which I helped make the first 2 runs of. A lot of the same thing, a lot of like joy of genre, fan fiction, joy of playing in an existing universe, but like because it was longer, you could dive into it more deeply, and it could also be about things like, oh, the fantasy of actually being able to vanquish evil and having friends. Back at university, some of my inspirations at this time were the decadent and symbolist movements. So like modern Modernist art movements from the late 1800s, which taught me that there is great beauty to be found in ugly things, like the decapitation of men. Because the purpose of art isn't merely to decorate, but to awaken feeling. And anything that can do that can go beyond what we expect and transport us to another state of being, is worthy of being determined beautiful, theoretically at least. Symbolism teaches things which cannot be easily expressed directly, can sometimes be understood through symbols, that sometimes we need a layer of imagination between us and the thing to approach it. This is just a little book recommendation. I have like way too much to say, but this is basically The Generation by Max Nordau. It's dedicated to Cesare Lombroso, who was one of the guys who invented the measure people's brains to see if they're criminals. But it's okay, because this book is just a list of all the art movements that these guys think are bad. So I discovered it, and I was like, I will now make all of these people my business, because obviously they're awesome. One of the art movements that Nordau really hates is the pre-Raphaelites, and I became obsessed with Ophelia in 2015, just around the time I went to the lab inside Hamlet, which is based on Shakespeare's tragedy and took place at Elsinore Castle, and for which I got to GM a little. From this I learned that life should matter, even though it always ends in death, and especially because it always ends in death. This was also when I started collecting historical fun facts that I've been hoarding like little jewels to share yearly on social media in my historical advent calendar, which is how I can tell you that the painter Millet originally had a dead mouse over here under some of these flowers in the corner. Sorry. And also that another painter from this movement, Dan de Gabriel Rossetti, had a whole menagerie of exotic animals, but his favorite pet was a wombat named Top, which he killed by feeding it cigars. And this is a drawing that he did of after Top died from eating too many cigars. The model who was lying for Ophelia here, Lizzie Siddle, has become one of the constants in my work. And here's Sister Daphne is from a Vampire the Masquerade book, In Memoriam, which I was lead developer for, where I have snuck her in as a vampire nun who is totally over, like, the toxic relationship she had with the wombat-killing husband when she was alive. One of the great artists who have inspired me, Walter Pater, was also the one who got me onto The Return of the Pagan Gods. He also wrote that Mona Lisa is a vampire, which I think is lovely because she represents the undying ancient world, and her secretive smile is the smile of someone who knows what humanity has left behind. I studied comparative literature, and I finished my degree with extensive research on the Greek god Pan in late Victorian literature, and like he was as popular as vampires. Everyone in the late 1800s was just crazy about Pan. Pan is the goat god. He's known for like being really horny and like sexually assaulting goats and also playing a flute. He also represents like just raw nature, and I'll be talking more about him tomorrow in my talk about weird fiction. But yeah. What is it to meet a god, and how does it translate to making interactive fiction? In antiquity, seeing a god was to be transported to the realm of the divine, which is where dreams, madness, inspiration, and ecstasy rule. You got there by performing rituals that would summon the god, and which basically would just put you into a trance state where you feel like you are in the presence of the god. And while Pan may not be real, human ability to travel elsewhere in the mind certainly is. I think that, in Nordic lab we call that immersion. That when the design, the writing, the aesthetics of the lab all perform the role of ritual to help the player transport their self elsewhere, to let go of reality and drift away and dream. And I'm not like the first LARP theorist to say that LARP's a ritual. I'm not doing that. But it is. In the LARP Baphomet, which I helped GM a number of times, which was I basically helped lead the cult, a early 1900s mystical society accidentally awakened the gods Pan and Baphomet, and then things get out of control. For me, one of the reasons that Baphomet was a very interesting LARP aesthetically is because it's kind of extreme. The goal for me as one of the cult leaders was to actually be able to push people to reach a state of like immersion where possession was felt as actively real, and where you were so enraptured by the idea of acting under one of these gods that you didn't stop to question at all what you were doing. And sometimes that worked. For me, yeah, I don't have like divine possession, theoleptic possession, and the sacramental unity of player, body, and character soul as a goal for every narrative I make. But I do think that a story should be able to possess and provide something that we return with from our visit in the divine spheres. I think that when we do return with this kind of inspiration, we become empowered to look at our lives again and see if there's anything we want to possibly do different. This is around 2020, and I had moved on to Dionysus. And I got to publish a bit about him, and I noted, I was looking at a bunch of different gods. I also wanted to write about like Venus, Aphrodite. I had a whole project about comparing depictions of Venus through like Renaissance, antiquity, with the Venus Racer ads, because it's like, it just got a little bit broad. There are a lot of those ads. Anyway, I noted that Dionysus would make an infinitely better boyfriend than Pan, not just because of the sexual assault stuff, but also just he's like, he's faithful, which is just so rare in Greek mythology. He also represents a more cultured inspiration, and Dionysus teaches us that inspiration is a state of drunkenness, and that you should be drunk, like not necessarily on alcohol, but absolutely also on alcohol if you feel like it, but drunk on life, on love, of whatever it is that inspires you to create. He also has an inner darkness. He's a god of the wine and the vineyard, and you can't grow things unless they also die every year. So there's a lot of terror and decay and human sacrifice in his myth as well. But that's how it is. If we're going to dream, we risk also having nightmares. Which is also one of the philosophies of the Forbidden History, which is a dark academia sort LARP that I create with some of my closest friends. It's inspired by Donna Tartt's The Secret History, which is a novel where some Latin students summon Dionysus and are possessed and make some minor errors of judgment. Our LARP takes place at an exclusive 80s college, because being born in 89, I just know that the 80s are the most magical time. And it's designed to allow every single participant to connect with divine inspiration, in the meaning of letting go of whatever normally stops them from expressing themselves truthfully, i.e. from wearing what they want to wear, from having the gender that they want to have, from making art, from writing poetry, from doing things that make you feel stupid because you're not good at them, or you feel like you are too adult or too serious, and like, we just want people to come to this place and do it anyway and not question it. We want them to feel free and to feel inspired and to connect meaningfully both with the story world and with each other in it. And well, terror is also a part of this, because Dionysus is also terrible, and because it's something to tap into, to feel deeply and perhaps transform into something. So it's allowed to hurt, but like as long as it makes you feel. Like Dionysus isn't actually a participant in this lab, physically. We don't have a Saturday demon, like an NPC who shows up with a crown of wine leaves, threatening to rip someone apart. But when it goes well, he's lingering in the evening light down by the lake outside the castle. He's in the massive amounts of poetry that gets written that people are actually taking seriously. It's not pastiche, there's no ironic distance. People are actually goddamn writing poetry. And I think that like this lab, like that sums up what I think narrative should be able to do. It doesn't always have to do it, but it should be able to do it. It should be able to release us from these unhelpful inhibitions, these rules we have about how we should think or how we can even dare to imagine, and let us imagine ourselves or other versions of ourselves differently, and to return from that imaginative journey with renewed inspiration. I think that, lab is especially suited for this in some ways, but I think all fiction, it's also, great literature. This is what it does. It transports us. In Forbidden History, character design is a huge part of how we get this to work, because every character is written to be transformative, or at least have the potential. We put a lot of work into writing who you were, who you would like to be, what things pull you back and what things make you feel free. But we also have a lot of work on workshops and all of that. But yeah, I'm going to talk more about character design and writing characters for enchantment on Sunday, if you want to hear more about that. Then I realized that I had completely forgotten one of the pretty big things that I made, and I just snuck that in there 40 minutes ago. But yeah, in 2020, I was part of running 3 Mutant Year Zero labs on an island outside of Stockholm, which we were able to do because we were on a deserted island, and we also had a bunch of hazmat suits from the 80s. And we were it was 10, 15 people, so we were just outside, distancing, playing mutants. And it was, I think, a lot of Nordic lab. You're always looking for the secret, that thing that can make the enchantment feel real, that thing that Dionysus says you should be drunk on, that thing that is the secret to how you feel. And in Nordic lab, a lot of the time that thing is sex. Sometimes. It's not about sex, but you build some sort of erotic tension or horror or whatever. In Mutant, the mutants are all childlike. It's about innocence, and it's about reconnecting with playfulness, and it's still dangerous because in the fiction, we're in the post-apocalypse. They are running around trying not to get eaten by the rot and by other mutants, but it's also just about returning to this childlike fascination with the world that you're in and seeing everything with new eyes. But yeah, let's talk about love. On the left, here you see Victor Hugo, who was the author of Les Miserables and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Next to him, we have a portrait of the young lady Adèle Fouché. And on the right, we have an English translation of some lines of a poem he sent to her while he was courting her. The Bat. Yes, I know you. I've seen you in my dreams. Sad bird, lurking over me, although useless it seems. I fear not the uneven circles of your dark flight, its omens delivered already by the ghosts of the night. So go, you make me feel neither guilt or delight. Does that strike you as super romantic to send to someone that you're dating? Is the bat some sort of metaphor for Adele? And he's like, oh, you're watching and following me everywhere, and it's just really useless. No, but when she received this, it came in like a brown paper package, and she thought it was flowers, because normally that was what you would be getting. And she opened the package, and it was a live bat. And then on the inside of the paper, the poem was written, you know? I don't know. I mean, they say that autism is like a new thing. I don't know. But anyway, you know, love is also an enchantment. Love is also something that can transport you to a realm beyond Excel sheets that's playful and that breaks sometimes, questionably so, with the rules for what you're supposed to do. She was super shocked. Like, she was like, but they still got married. Like, she wrote about it in her autobiography, but like they definitely still got married. She was like, oh, he wrote a poem. I thought if it had just been a bat, she would have broken up with him, but like, there was a poem, so. A year or two ago, I worked on a Ukrainian romance mobile game called My Fantasy, writing branching romance stories. And romance is a genre that's like often looked down as unserious. Where did I hide my water? I think that maybe it's not completely coincidental that it's mostly women who enjoy romance, and that maybe that has something to do with why we think it's so silly. But I don't actually think it's silly. Like, this is very tropified, but romance is a genre where it helps to use a lot of tropes because it helps you to tap into the expectations of what you think is going to happen and get excited about that. Also, it's not easy to write. These games, like, they're branching narrative, and they're 80% flirty banter. They publish a chapter every week in like each story. That is 8,000 words weekly of like 80% flirty banter, where you're like just flirty enough, but like not pushy, but like fascinating, but not desperate. And I think at this point, like, the devil could wake me up in the middle of the witching hour, and I'd be able to flirt my way out of it, provided the devil has a weakness for men who yearn and can't really express it directly until chapter 9. So Kiss Me, Kill Me is a mafia romance that I worked on, and it's basically a Romeo and Juliet story about two heirs to two crime families, but you know, they're adult and they know their way around guns. Which unfortunately meant that I also had to learn to write action scenes, and also I had to like write them out completely, because in branching narrative you can't just like set the scene and be like, this could get cool, and then just like let the lappers or tabletop players or whatever figure it out. You have to actually make it cool. But now I can do that, I think, and that's good. Beauty and the Billionaire, which is hard for me to say seriously because I know how dumb it sounds. But yeah, it's a modern fairy tale retelling of Beauty and the Beast, and it's about a deeply damaged but attractive self-made billionaire who runs hot and cold because he doesn't believe he deserves to be loved, and a stubborn woman who will do absolutely anything to save her father, even wear silk dresses to 5-star restaurants and go on dates with a guy she already likes. On the surface, and also sometimes deeper down, stories like these look pretty toxic. Like, I think we all know at this point that Edward watching Bella at night in Twilight isn't actually a healthy relationship behavior. But it doesn't have to be because it's fiction. Like, the reader is assumed to be consenting to reading these stories because otherwise they would stop. And you can actually push content on the reader. You can make it non-consensual because, you know, there's a buy-in. You give them a choice. You're like, you set up a scene and then you can change it and make it. We don't do that. We make sure that they get what they expect to get, you know. But yeah, they're reading the story. They want the story. Romance in general, I think I'm going to make a claim that it's about pleasurable visits and escapist fantasies, and that they often offer this fantasy of being, yearned for, seen, desired, flirted with. And also a lot of these stories offer the fantasy of being rich or becoming rich enough to pursue your hobbies and your interests. So like this ultimate fantasy of not being trapped by capitalism. Which I think is interesting, and yes. Most of the players of these games are Australian women around 40. But this game got big in 2020, and we all know, like, I don't know. In Australia, there was nothing happening in 2020. These people were not allowed to go outside. So I think that makes sense. But yes, I think romance, like, it also offers a kind of enchantment, and I think that there's a lot of potential in this genre, actually, for exploring how to maximize these feelings, because it does have these ingredients of playfulness and seeing the world through a glamour. My latest significant game job has been working with World of Darkness, which I've done like since the beginning of 5th edition, but like on-off. There was a brief chaotic period, but I've been doing it more constantly on a freelance basis the last few years. Most of my work has been Vampire the Masquerade, and as you can see, I absolutely refuse a project if it is not done in reds and pinks. Vampire combines many of the things that I love, so tragedy, decay, morally questionable beauty, the interrogation of what makes humanity worthwhile, decapitation, this like the dark city, this like gothic vibe. For the one-shot Under the Skin, I got to write a story about losing yourself to something ancient and terrible. I made like the rules way too complicated, so if you actually ever want to run it, feel free to talk to me and I will tell you how to simplify it. Because it was the first one-shot I wrote, and I was like, oh, you have to write so many words, and I was like, oh, the way to do that is to make more rules. No. For Tattered Facade, which is coming out soon, I wrote about how to storytell horror. For Bloodstained Love, I made up some disturbed, romanceable storyteller characters. And for In Memoriam, which I developed with help from Johanna, which it's focused on the experience of playing ancilla characters, so that's vampires who are old enough that everyone they ever knew when they were alive, they have died. So not Mona Lisa old, but definitely like Leslie Siddle old. And it's a very different focus than the usual 5th edition vampire focus on being very young and just having woken up and like, oh no, how do I stop eating my friends? You already ate your friends, okay? You're over that, onto new things. And I got to go really deep into the thought experiment of what it might be like to potentially live forever and still fail to enjoy it. And I had so much fun with this book. It ended up encompassing a lot of my favorite themes and subjects, and like everyone was such a joy to work with. And like, of course, like this was a serious adult job, and like you have to make the IP holder happy, and you have to follow the outlines and all of these things. But to me, it also is just like really has been proof of concept that when you put passion into projects and you just genuinely make them as good as you think you can, and you make them how you think they should be made, that can be worth it. That can really be worth it. And like it does seem to have actually pretty good reviews online so far, which is super cool because World of Darkness fans aren't always easy. Like people have a lot of love for this, and so it's sort of, you go into it sort of with the expectation that someone out there will absolutely detest and hate what you do, and you just have to be okay with it. Which also is one of the reasons that I'm like, then you might as well just do it how you think it should be done. Because then when people come for you and they say you did a shit job, at least you're getting backlash for something that you genuinely stand by, and not for something where you were trying to make people happy. You can't make everybody happy, especially not when you're like reinventing an existing IP that people have like really loved for like decades. You can't. So at least, be like, oh, well, I'm happy. And yeah, well, the darkness is also enchantment. It isn't usually written to be escapist, and it can be run in a lot of different ways. Like when I GM, I like to try to make it horror. I don't know if I succeed, but I try. But you know, it has these aspects also of something that lifts you out of your everyday and lets you consider your reality in different ways. And that just about sums up my aesthetic philosophy. It isn't the topics of a story that determines its quality, but how it makes you feel and what it leaves you with. Okay, I said I would tell you what romance and horror have in common. I have to hurry up a little bit, but yeah, it has something obvious in common, obviously. Sad, broken monster boys who will drive you to the edge of desperation and beyond. The one on the right I get is my sad boy vampire narrator that I got to invent for Memoriam. And he keeps eating his girlfriends, but he always thinks that maybe this time I won't. And it's, you know, art mirrors reality sometimes. But yeah, I mean, both genres, I think, particularly about putting a spell on the reader or the player, and they don't really, like horror, romance, they don't work unless you're emotionally affected. So the storyteller's job becomes to build anticipation and tension using all the tools that you can to get that emotional connection. Now, do you want a little exercise in spite, or do you want to ask questions? Please close your eyes. If you haven't closed your eyes, you don't need this exercise. Think of something you would like to do at this con. It can be something small that'll make your experience better. Perhaps something like staying off your work email for the whole weekend, or introducing yourself to cool foreign game designers. If there's a little voice pointing out why this would be difficult for you, just acknowledge that feeling and let it pass. Let's have a deep breath in and out. Now, I want you to understand that the most mediocre, bitter, small-minded person you can think of doesn't think you can do this thing. In fact, you're not allowed. Like, hopefully there's now some sort of a sense of indignation waking up in you, but otherwise you're going to have to imagine. There are no rules. We are all just doing our best, making it up as we go along. You make the rules, not that little voice. Notice where in your body your spite lives. Is it in your chest? Is it up along your back somewhere? Find your spite and connect with it. You might lose sense of this, but it's right here for you when you need it. And when you're going to do that thing that you're a little bit worried about doing, just find it and do that thing anyway. Because fuck the rules. Now you may please return. Great. This is my ludography. We'll just look at it for like 3 seconds so that when this video is online, people can pause it. And yeah, as I told you, I have 2 more program items this weekend. I have a talk about weird fiction and horny trees tomorrow, and a character writing item on Sunday, and enchantment will figure heavily in both. This is a bonus slide. Lord Byron had a tame circus bear in his rooms at university when he studied. Does anyone have any questions? We have 4 minutes.
Hi. First of all, can I just say, I'm a huge fan of you. My Memoriam, you did a fantastic job. So thank you so much. I want to actually ask you a question about a lot of the things you like to write about. I mean, I share them. And one of the big things I often kind of struggle with is with characters that live, for example, for centuries, right? And you mentioned the fact that, they sometimes fail with feelings of joy, for example, when you find enjoyment. What is ways, for example, to find joy in this? Is there a way to do it?
I think you have to get fascinated as a vampire. Also as a person who gets tired of living, if that ever happens. You have to find, like, you have to have a hobby, and ideally that hobby is not murdering people in different ways, because that's going to get old, like, pretty quickly, I think, depending how you do it. I mean, maybe Hannibal would be fine. But yeah, I mean, find an interest that is endless. Like, a vampire who's a historian is never gonna, like, run out of things to do. I imagine, you know, someone who just has, like, rooms where the walls are just covered with, like, different, like, crafts that they got really into. And just also, like, falling in love, you know, in reality, when we fall in love, every time you fall in love, you think, oh, this is the one time. And then if it breaks, you're like, yeah, I will never love again. But, you know, you will. You will be surprised. And I think that even for people who live for centuries, like, you will continue to be surprised.
Thank you.
Yes. That's you, Jock.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk. Could you think aloud for us a little bit about what it would take to make romance LARPs that would be engaging to play? Why don't we?
There are some romance labs. There's one in Sweden soon about some people who were, like, matched up in, like, a perfect matchmaking agency, and now the matchmaking agency found out that they made a mistake, and everyone has to meet up 10 years later and, like, get rematched. Which is, I think it's partially about romance. It's also partially about, like, trauma and terror, because it's like, oh, you are happy? No. But I mean, that's also romance, right? You can't write like, in these 20-episode mobile games, like, you can't write an engaging romance where they're just happy all the time. You have to think it's not going to work out. Yes, you just need to design for it. I think that some of the most, like, I always play romance in labs. I love that. And I think some of the best romance play I've had has been in, like, these sort of Jane Austen type things where we are taught to forget to touch people, because, you know, you have all of these, especially Nordic Lappers are very touchy. And we just like hugging and like, but then you unlearn the touchiness, and you get to that stage of, like, excitement where it's like, oh, when he gave me a flower, our fingers brushed. And I think that is, you know, just reinventing excitement in different ways. Like, we can design for it. One more question.
As an author of games with sometimes slightly challenging audiences, what has been the situation that has almost made you think, I don't want to do this anymore, this is too much? How did you get past that? What is your magic trick to keep going and enjoy what you're doing?
To just take a step back and do something completely different for a while. And because, yeah, I mean, don't read the comments. Get off your computer. Talk to some people in real life. Sometimes, you know, maybe write a little bit about, or just sit with yourself and write through a text. You don't have to put it anywhere, but just write through, like, what were actually my motivations? Was I actually trying to create an international crisis? Did I actually, you know, feel like there is any one particular population group that deserves to be exterminated? No. Yeah, just gotta go out into the actual fucking wood. Turn off the internet. Thank you.